Hello and welcome to another grammar lesson. Today we'll be looking at some subordinate clauses, relative pronouns, and some language functions. Let's get started. What are subordinate clauses? Subordinate clauses are there to add extra information. Let's see how. We want to focus on many things. For example, the purpose and result. Let's take a look at how we can add extra information. We can add information to express purpose. For example, we use the word to, in order to, so as to, or so that. If we're trying to link a cause and effect, we use the famous word because or because of. However, if we're trying to link actions with results, we're going to be using to be the real cause of with the result that or lead to. Let's look at the purpose. What is their purpose? Look at the first sentence. Their purpose is to succeed. Their objective is to gross profit. Their aim is to sell more goods. Their goal is to improve their products. Their target is to be the best. As you can notice, after the word to, it's always followed by a verb. Let's look at more examples and try to understand how we can use it. Look at this man. He's trying to reach the top. So if we can analyze his purpose, we'll say his purpose is to reach the top. Notice to is always followed by the base form of the verb. What we want to do now is we want to identify and try to underline the connectors expressing purpose, expressing the reason behind what they're doing. Look at these people. These people, they should work together so as to come up with a business plan. What's their purpose? To come up with a business plan. So what we can say is, they should work together so as to. This is the connector. We can also start with that in the beginning of the sentence. So we can say, so as to come up with a business plan, they should work together. Use it in the beginning of the sentence or use it in the middle of the sentence. Let's look at another example. Here, they're discussing their plan in order to avoid any difficulties. Can you find the connector here? Exactly, it's in order to. They're discussing their plan in order to avoid any difficulties. We can also start with it, our sentence, and we can say, in order to avoid any difficulties, they are discussing their plan. Very easy. Now, what about this sentence? Sami traveled to Australia to complete his higher education. If we start with it in the beginning of a sentence, we're going to be using to. To complete his higher education, Sami traveled to Australia. Very, very easy. Now comes the question, how do we use it in the negative form? Simple. We simply add not in the middle, just before the word to. So if we want to say the sentence, I agreed to her suggestion so as not to. Instead of saying so as to, we'll simply add the not in the middle and we'll say so as not to upset her. We tiptoed so as not to annoy anyone. Very simple. Simply add the word not before the word to. Let's look at these couple of sentences and try to identify the sentence that doesn't follow the grammatical pattern. Look at the first one. She works hard to gain more money. He ran so as to catch the bus. She drove fast in order to be on time. Why don't you start out early so that you don't have to hurry? Read them by yourself and try to think which one doesn't follow the grammatical pattern. Exactly. The answer is the last one. Why is it the last one? Because here we're asking a question. We're not giving a purpose. Why don't you start on time so that you don't have to hurry? There is no purpose here displayed for us. Now we've finished with the purpose and now it's time to offer explanations. Which words do we use to offer or introduce explanations? Very simple. We have the following words. In order to, or so as to. If you decide to use these words, you have to follow them with the base form of the verb. In order to study, to study, so as to study. However, if you decide to go with so that, you're going to add a clause after it. For example, so that he could study. So the subject and the verb. Very simple. You can also use in order that. Very simple. Let's see how they work. They're easy as long as you know what follows them. Let's look at the first one. If you decide to use so that, let's see how we can form the clause. It's followed by the subject. So that plus subject plus can or will plus the verb. Now, it all depends on the tense of the verb. If we're going to be using the future tense, we'll use can or will. Let's see how that works. Our example here, I've come here so that we, the subject, can talk. Or I can say, I will give her a key so that she, the subject, can get into the flat. Very simple, as you notice. If you decide to use the word will, you can also say, I've come here so that we will talk. Or I will give her a key so that she will get into the flat at any time. Now, if you decide to use in order that, not in order to, in order that follows the same rule as so that. You have to follow it with the subject, could, and the verb. Not the same as so, in order to. Let's look at more examples. What about if it's in the past tense? If it's in the past tense, the only thing we're going to be changing is the tense of the verb. So we'll say, so that, plus the subject, plus could or would, because this is what changes the tense, plus the base form of the verb. He spoke quietly so that nobody could hear him. He left the note on the pillow so that he could find it. The same thing, very simple. If we decide to go with would, it's the same thing. We're simply going to change the word could to would. He spoke so quietly so that nobody would hear him. He left the note on the pillow so that he would find it. Very simple. If you decide again to use in order that, notice if you choose in order that, make sure that you follow it with a subject, could or would, and the form, the base form of the verb, and not just the verb as if you use in order to. Let's keep going and make sure that we use the rest of the clauses. What about the cause-effect relationship? We've talked about purpose and we've talked about explanations. What about cause and effect? Something happens and then there's an effect. It means one thing makes another thing happen, like the dominoes you have in front of you. Let's look at how that works. Some people move to greener areas because they want to survive. Notice the word because. Another example we have here is we need to produce more food because there are more people to feed. We can also use it in the beginning. Because there are more guests to come, we need to prepare more food. Let's move on to another example. We use the following words and phrases to link actions with results, or cause and effect, cause and result. We have the word so followed by the clause, or the word to be, the cause of, plus a noun, or with the result that plus the clause, or can lead to plus a noun. Let's look at the next example, or how we can apply these. It was getting late, so everybody started to leave. As you can notice, it was getting late is the first one, and the result, everybody started to leave. The linking word in the middle is so, cause and effect. Let's look at another example. Human activities are often the real cause of desertification. Here, we want to be, we're meaning to be the real cause of, followed always by a noun. Notice, human activities are. Human activities are. What's the cause? Often, the real cause of desertification. So the effect is desertification. Let's move on to another example. Here, we're going to be using can lead to. So we'll say, farmers tend to overcultivate their land with the result that the soil becomes unproductive. What's the cause? Farmers tend to overcultivate their land. That's the cause. What's the effect? The soil becomes unproductive. And you can see with the result, that is our linking word or clause. Here we'll be using lead to, and when you decide to use lead to, always follow it by a noun. So for example, wildfires, this is the cause, can lead to. Lead to what? What do they lead? Greater pressure. This is the noun that we use, and this is the effect. So the cause is wildfires can lead to greater pressure. Excellent. So let's get some practice then. Let's look at the first one. Lack of vitamin D, what illness? Because, in order to, so that, or is the cause of. Look at the sentence. Lack of vitamin D, an illness. Obviously, this is cause and effect, so we'll use is the cause of. So lack of vitamin D is the cause of illness. Let's move on to the next sentence. I need some water. I am feeling thirsty. So we want an explanation. So we'll use what? Because, in order to, so that, or is the cause of. What do you think? Which one will you use? I need some water because I'm feeling thirsty. Excellent. Let's look at another example. I closed the window. Space, the wind couldn't get in. What? What would you use? Because, in order to, so that, or is the cause of. I closed the window so that the wind couldn't get in. Excellent, excellent. Now, another example here, we have farmers use machinery, harvest their crops. What do you think? Farmers use machinery in order to harvest their crops. Excellent. And now another example. The lecture was so interesting, all the students were involved. Which one would you choose? Take some time to think before we answer the question. The answer here is with the result that. The lecture was so interesting with the result that all the students were involved. This brings us to relative pronouns. Now, relative pronouns, we have a number of relative pronouns we're going to be talking about today. Let's start with the first one, which basically refers to things or animals. We also have where, which refers to a place. When refers to a time. Where refers to a place. Whose relates to possession. However, whom, we're talking about people or a person, that's the object rather than the subject. Let's try to look at these sentences and analyze or see how we use relative pronouns to connect sentences. The man who is on stage singing is my brother. The plane which Captain Nawaf flew is impressive. Munira will never forget the day when she graduated from the Royal Academy. I'm going to Kuwait City where I have very important meetings. The man whose house got stolen asked me if I could be an eyewitness. And as you can notice with all of these sentences, the relative pronouns are connecting them to either add extra information or one of the other. Let's look at the first relative clauses that are used to give extra information. The first one, my elder brother, who is 23 years old, now studies engineering in Australia. My brother is 23 years old. My older brother studies engineering in Australia. Now here, you can notice that they're giving two information. It's the same thing as saying two sentences, however, we're connecting them together. And as we're speaking about the brother, my older brother, we decided to go with who, which refers to a person. Again, we're giving extra information. My neighbor, whose car broke down yesterday, asked me to give him a lift to his workplace. We're talking about the neighbor. What's the focus here? The focus is his car broke down. So we're talking about the car that belongs to the neighbor, and that's why we decided to use whose. It's the same as saying, my neighbor's car broke down. My neighbor asked me to give him a lift to his workplace. Now, again, relative clauses can combine facts about a thing or a person, just as we saw earlier. Let's look at this sentence. My father, who really enjoys his job, is a teacher. My father, who really enjoys his job, is a teacher. So here, there are two facts. The first fact is that my father is a teacher. The second fact, my father really enjoys his job. So we're going to be using the relative pronoun who and say, my father is a teacher who really enjoys his job. Very simple. Now, the word which, we said, refers to things. My mobile phone, which was made in Japan, is very small. We can also say, my school, which has over 1,000 students, is near the city center. Whose, we said, refers to what? Refers to possessions. So we'll say, my sister, whose name is Selma, is 17 years old. The pilot, whose house is in Al Jahra, flies all over the world. who refers to people. So we'll say, my brother who lives in Kuwait City is called Umar. Or we can say, Captain Nawaf Qablani, who was her instructor, was impressed by her determination. Very simple. Where, we said, refers to places. So we'll say, Munira visited the town where she was born. Munira joined the Royal Academy where she learned to fly. Now I think you're ready to start practicing using the relative pronouns. So let's look at the first example. The car he rented was in a fantastic condition. Now we're referring to the car. A car is a thing, so what do you think we're going to be using? Which, who, whose, or where? Obviously, we'll be going with which. Excellent. Let's look at the next example. The pilot was wearing a smart uniform. Welcome the passengers on board. Now, here we're talking about the pilot and what the pilot was wearing. So we'll say the pilot who was wearing a smart uniform welcomed everyone on board. Excellent. Let's look at the next question. Amelia's husband, name is George Putnam, supported her ambition. And here we're talking about Amelia's husband and his name. So which one do you think we're going to be using? Which, who, whose, or where? Obviously, we'll be going with whose because the name belongs to the husband. So we'll say Amelia's husband, whose name is George Putnam, supported her ambitions. Let's look at the next example. He's a man, opinion I respect. Now I'm talking about the opinion of the man. So which one am I going to be using? Which, where, who, or whose? Obviously, I'll be going with whose. This ends the grammar section and it's time for functions. When it comes to functions, it's very important that you focus on the situation and what you would say in that situation. Read it and put yourself in that position. Try to come up with something reasonable using full, accurate sentences. Let's look at the example at hand. Your friend says we should save the environment by cutting down trees. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you give reasons or state advantages? So think about it. Your friend says we should cut down trees to save the environment. What do you think? How would you respond to that situation? Use full, accurate sentences. And this brings us to the end of our episode. In this episode, we looked at clauses of purpose, relative pronouns, and how to respond to language functions. Thank you for watching.